Hello everyone, I'm back with another very overdue Marvel Legends action figure set review, and this time I'll be looking at the Amazon exclusive Venom set that came out last year. And this set is comprised of 3 action figures. We have Venom, we have Agony, and we have Riot. And if those names are new to you, that's because they're based on a 90s serial called Venom Lethal Protector. This was a limited series that actually kicked off Venom's own comic book series. And that series introduced 5 brand new symbiotes to the Marvel Universe. And across the years, we've had a handful of Marvel Legends releases based on these characters, but we hadn't completed the entire set. Up until last year, the only symbiotes that we had were Lasher, Phage, and Scream. But now finally, thanks to this set, we will actually have the final 2 symbiotes to complete this family. So let's dive in by taking a look at this packaging. Now first off, of course, this is plastic free. It is just a box, there's no window displays here whatsoever. But this is really nice artwork. This is original artwork that's been commissioned for this release. I think this looks absolutely fantastic, really displayable. There's really not much text here spoiling this fantastic image, so you can put this on display and it's going to look absolutely fantastic. In terms of its sizing, this is a sizable package, but it's not huge. We've seen some of the other Amazon exclusive sets, Wolverine, Spider-Man, in recent years, where they've had 5 figures in and they've been quite tall, quite broad sets. This is a much smaller packaging, it's a lot more slimline and it's a lot shorter too, but it's quite manageable. So this feels like a nice healthy size, very impactful when you put it on display, but not too big that it's going to take up a lot of space. Now if we look at the side panel, I think they've used this space here quite well. It's quite a narrow space, but they've actually managed to do something with it that's quite attractive and fun when you put it on your shelf, if you put it on side profile. It's nice that we've got these images taken from the front of the packaging of each of these characters, and I think this looks quite attractive and is well done. Sadly, the back of the packaging is a little more underwhelming. Again, we see those same 3 images taken from the front of the packaging. The rest of it is just a black void. We have the nice Venom logo at the top there, and we had some text about each character. Although, for the life of me, I don't understand why Hasbro keep referring to certain characters as Marvels. So in this case, we see Marvel's Riot, as opposed to Agony or Venom. Why isn't he just called Riot? I don't understand why we have to have Marvels in front of that. And sometimes Hasbro seems to do this with certain characters, but not all. It's really inconsistent, and it's kind of strange. There is a top-loaded flap at the top of the packaging that you can open up and pull the interior card insert out. The interior card tray is divided into 3 parts with a segment going across all 3 to kind of lock them into place. And as you can see, the figures are contained in their rice paper. By now, you'll know I'm not a huge fan of this approach. I think it doesn't really hold the figures in place nice and securely enough, and it makes it a real faff when you try to get these back into the packaging and fold it up. Inevitably, things are going to stick out and not fit in quite as comfortably as they would do if they had a plastic mold. So let's start off with Venom. Now, to be honest, when I first saw this release, I thought this was simply a reissue of the previous Venom series, Venom that we'd seen before, but actually he's significantly enhanced. This is a brand new mold and sculpt. He's given 2 alternate heads, but the one he comes with in packaging is the most impressive. I really like this sculpting. I think they've done a really good job of getting him sort of mid-transformation between Eddie Brock and Venom. I love how the tongue is still distended and you can see the teeth in the tongue and it looks like the goo is literally just moving off his face. I think they've done a really fantastic job of this. I love the expression on Eddie Brock's face there. I think the paint apps are really well applied. There's actually a really nice sort of very slight metallic wash to his eye there as well. I think this looks really good. This is very effective and looks very authentic. So I think top marks for this. This is a fantastic new sculpt and this is really attractive to Venom collectors. The body mold they've chosen is really appropriate. It's actually slightly bigger and chunkier than the previous release, and I will compare the 2 a little bit later on in the video, but I think they've got a really nice big build on Venom, as he should be. I really like the use of different parts that they've used on this figure. I'm not sure if they've been used previously elsewhere. I'm sure they must have been, but this is really successful. I think they've done a nice job, and likewise, the paint apps, I really love the dimensions, the proportions of the spider logo on his chest. This looks really healthy, really nicely done, very comic book accurate. And I really like the sculpt that they've gone for with his hands, his arms, and his legs all look absolutely fantastic. So this looks pretty much pitch perfect. Now, there's not an awful lot when it comes to paint washes running through this figure. It is just produced in that base plastic black mould, but it looks really effective and I think it works really, really well. Looking at the articulation, there is a ball joint at the top of the head there, so he can rotate his head around from side to side. It will sort of lean or wobble left and right, but it will lean all the way back there if you want to nod his head back and forwards, which is fantastic. Now, there's a ball joint at the top of his shoulder here, but you'll also notice there is this rather wonderful butterfly wing joint, which I absolutely love seeing this on my Marvel Legends figures. There's a huge range of motion here, so he can really get his arms back and forwards in any gripping motion that you want, which is brilliant. Of course, he does have that ball joint in the shoulder there. There's a complementary bicep swivel, double joints at the elbow, and then a pin swivel at the wrist, so that hand can rotate all the way around, and of course it will hinge forwards and backwards as well. Now when we look at the torso, there is a straight swivel at the waist, so of course he can move from side to side, and then there is the ab crunch in the upper torso as well that allows him to bend forwards and backwards a really good distance. A lot of posability on this figure. Ball joints in the hips allow the legs to kick out to the side, complementary thigh cut at the very top of the thigh there. The legs will kick forwards, they'll kick backwards. There's a double joint at the knee as well, so you can get that lower leg all the way back, which is great. And then finally there is a ball joint at the ankle, allowing the foot to hinge forwards and backwards, but also swivel from side to side. Now, he is pretty light when it comes to accessories, but he does come with two alternate closed fist hands, as well as that alternate head sculpt. These are both really effective. I think they're nice accessories to have. It definitely gives us a different look for the Venom figure, and I think this looks really, really good. I like that elongated tongue. I think this is a brand new sculpt. I don't think we've seen this before previously, and certainly not on this scale, because this figure does scale up slightly from the previous release, and I think this looks really, really good. Definitely puts me in mind of the Mark Bagley version of Venom, which happens to be my personal favourite, because that was the one I grew up with, I suppose. But this looks really, really good. I'm really, really pleased with how they've produced this Venom figure all in all. So let's compare it against the previous release. So here he is standing next to the Venom that was released as part of the Venom wave that was released, I think, around about 2018, if I'm not mistaken. As you can see, this new sculpt is much bigger, much broader than that previous version, and there's a number of key differences, but he's also significantly taller as well. He's probably got about an inch or half an inch on that original release. If we look at the two frames, we can see obviously much bulkier, much broader. Obviously this new Venom has the benefit of that butterfly wing joint there, which is absolutely fantastic, but also the dimensions of the spider on the chest are just much more appropriate. They look a lot better, a lot more comic book accurate as well, and I just think the paint apps are really nicely done. So this just looks a lot better in terms of proportion and scale, but as I mentioned, of course, he does have that wonderful butterfly wing joint that sadly the original release does not have that. Now, in case you're wondering, that original release had two heads. It had a Venom head without a tongue and an Eddie Brock head. And yes, you can take those heads and put them on this new body. As you can see here, although the scaling is ever so slightly out, it's actually not too noticeable, and it actually works quite well even so. Funnily enough, I always felt that that Eddie Brock head was a little bit too big for the original release. Here, it seems to sit much more comfortably in proportion, and it looks pretty good. In conclusion then, for me, this is going to get the coveted 5 stars. And it's quite rare that I hand these out, but I can't really see any way to improve this figure. This is a significant upgrade on the previous release. For me, this is going to be my definitive Marvel Legends Venom going forwards. I think the proportions are fantastic, the articulation's amazing, the various different looks we can create with the accessories are really fun, and I think we have a pretty nice looking Venom here that can get into all sorts of really cool positions and look fantastic on display. And I can't ask for more than that. So yeah, well done Hasbro. This Venom is definitely worth the double dip. He is a significant upgrade on previous releases. Okay then, so let's move on to Agony. Now, first thing I have to say, I do really like the colour scheme of this figure. I think this really jumps out of you because it's got a really nice mix of complementary colours and shades of pink and purple, which is really attractive. And I think the head sculpt is quite nicely done. It is all one piece, and it looks quite nice in terms of the paint apps they've used on it. I really like the mix of shading, how it goes from a dark purple at the front of the head to a lighter purple at the back, which of course is the base plastic. I think this works really quite well in terms of the look. It looks pretty cool. The only criticism I have is that, of course, the hair is just one solid block of plastic, and of course we know that's going to cause some problems when it comes to looking at articulation. But other than that, this looks pretty cool, although the other downside to having that hair is, of course, it is quite heavy, so it is always going to weight the figure backwards a little bit as well. Now, whilst I really like the colours on this figure, and as I said, it looks really bright and colourful and it's really fun to look at, I have to be critical and say that sadly none of the design is actually sculpted in. This is the same female body we've seen released on many other Marvel Legends figures across the years. And in order to differentiate this character, all they've done sadly is just paint in detail. This is pretty disappointing because of course it just means the figure feels very flat, very 2D, and it doesn't feel like it's special in any way. Now I think the feet may be a brand new piece. I don't think I've seen these before, so this is a new sculpt at least in my collection. But other than that, there's really not an awful lot that makes this figure very different to any of the other figures that we've seen in recent years. Articulation wise, there is a ball joint in the head, but you can't really get an awful lot of use out of this. Mine's also incredibly stiff and it feels like I might break this joint, so I couldn't really move the head at all. It will certainly move down a really good distance, but of course the hair is going to stop you from moving it back in any meaningful way. There are ball joints in the shoulders, so of course his arms will lift up. There is a complementary bicep swivel. There are thankfully double joints at the elbow, which allow the arm to go all the way back, so I'm really pleased that this is pinless. This is fantastic. There is a pin joint at the wrist though that allows the hand to rotate all the way around and hinge forwards and backwards. There is a ball joint in the top of the torso that allows the figure to move from side to side, lean left and right a little bit, and bend forwards and backwards a little bit. Again, not a huge range of motion here, but enough to make a difference. There's more ball joints in the hips, of course, the legs will kick out to the side. There's that complementary thigh swivel at the top there as well, so you can rotate that all the way around. Of course the legs will kick forwards and backwards, a pretty healthy range there, which is great. Double joint at the knees, so that lower leg can kick all the way back as well, which is great. And then there is finally that ankle rocker at the very bottom there, so of course you can rotate that foot all the way around, hinge it forwards and backwards, and sort of lean it left and right as well. In terms of accessories, sadly she only comes with an extra pair of closed fists. For me, Agony is a 2-star figure. I'm just not feeling it, to be honest. I do really appreciate having this character in the collection at last. I think it's really nice to round out these symbiotes, and I think the colour design is really nice, and the head sculpt is pretty well done for the most part, but there does feel something a bit bare bones, a bit basic about this figure, and it would have been nice if they made a bit more of an effort. Maybe if they'd had a bit more of a wash running through her hair, or sort of a bit more texturing to the body, or maybe some fun accessories, something more sculpted in would have been nice and appreciated. As it is, this feels a bit of a cheap release really, and just kind of been cobbled together rather than having the full attention that I feel it probably deserved. So moving on to Riot. Riot, of course, is the biggest figure of the three in this set. He's actually quite oversized, he's quite chunky. In fact, he's so big that actually, when he comes in the packaging, his back is a separate piece that you have to plug in because he's too broad to fit in the packaging. Now, I'm not sure if they've recycled any of the pieces of this figure from the previous Monster Venom release perhaps, but the head sculpt is definitely brand new. I've not seen this before. I think this looks really cool. I think they've done a really good job of capturing the likeness, and I think this looks pretty monstrous. I like the individual teeth detail. You can see the tongue inside. I'm really glad they went for that open mouth. And again, I really like the metallic wash over the eye. I think that works really well. Makes it look a bit more alien and lifelike, and I think it looks really cool. Likewise, having the black stripe down the center of the head against the dark blue of the side looks really cool, and we can see this when we look at the rest of the body as well. Obviously we see these black patches which give it a bit more shading, a bit more texture and depth, which is really cool. As I said, I'm not entirely sure with this body sculpt whether this has been reused previously from a Monster Venom figure in the past. It's possible, but this is certainly new for me in my collection, and it's a really cool big oversized sculpt, which is very different to a lot of the other figures that we have in the collection. So this is really appreciated. It makes him feel very distinct, gives him his own personality, which is really fun. But some compromises have been made when it comes to articulation. He does, of course, have a ball joint at the top of his head, so he can rotate his head all the way around. He can't really lean it left and right too much, though. There's a little bit of wobble there, but not enough to really pose it. Now, thankfully, he can move his head up and down a really healthy distance, which is fantastic. And, of course, he has those big, chunky ball joints in his arms. Sadly, no butterfly wing joint here, but he can lift his arms up and out a really good distance. There is a complementary bicep swivel, which is great, but sadly, only a single joint at the elbow, which means his arm is limited to go into 90 degrees, and this is a compromise when it comes to a build and a sculpt of this scale. Now, it does have a pin swivel at the wrist, which can rotate all the way around, hinge forwards and backwards with no issue. There is a straight swivel at the waist, so he can move from side to side, and he has that same ab crunch as the Venom, so he can bend forwards and backwards, a really good range of motion here as well, which is fantastic. But it does feel a little bit more clumsy on a figure of this scale. He does have ball joints at the hip, so he can kick his legs out. There is a straight swivel at the top of the thigh there. The legs can kick forwards and backwards, and there is a double joint at the knee, so he can kick his lower leg back a pretty healthy distance. There's a strange swivel just above the ankle, so you can rotate rotate his foot around, and then there is a straight hinge at the ankle there as well, but it also pivots, so not only will the foot go forwards and backwards, it will also arc from side to side as well. Once again, accessories are very light for this character. We have just an alternate arm, which is in that sort of scythe kind of shape that we see sometimes with Carnage figures, for example. It's a very nice accessory. It does plug it into his arm. I wouldn't say it's seamless, but it just about works. It has a tendency to want to come loose a little bit. It doesn't really slot in as snugly as I would like, but it does look quite effective when it's in place. Now, all in all, despite having some nice articulation points, this figure does feel very top-heavy. It does feel kind of clumsy. So for me, this is a 3-star figure. I think this is pretty nice. There's certainly nothing wrong with it. It's perfectly functional. It looks really cool, and ultimately that is the whole point, I suppose, to have this on display and make it look really fun in our collections. It just feels a little bit like it's lacking something. It feels a little bit ungainly, and that definitely holds it back from being a 4 or even 5-star figure. But overall, it's not bad. It's actually quite nice, and as I said, it's welcome to have in the collection to round out our symbiotes. Okay, and now finally I thought it might be fun to just do some quick scale comparisons. Here is the Venom next to a standard Marvel Legends Spider-Man figure. This one was taken from the animated Spider-Man vs. Carnage 2-pack that we got earlier this year. As you can see, this is a really nice height differential. This feels really appropriate. Venom should be a bulkier, bigger version of Spider-Man, so this looks really good, very menacing. Here he is next to Carnage. Again, the sizing of this looks pretty appropriate to me. This looks really healthy. This is the way it should be, in my opinion, from the comic books that I grew up reading. This looks really, really good. Here he is next to Agony, and again, this looks pretty appropriate. I think this is pretty much in scale with that comic book series Lethal Protector, so I think this looks absolutely fine. And then finally, here he is with Riot, and of course you can see that Riot is in a completely different scale, once more dwarfing Venom, which is really, really cool. If we put Riot next to that Spider-Man, we can see there's a huge difference in scale between these figures, and this looks really, really awesome. Now, sadly, I don't have the Phage or the Lasher figure, but I do have the Scream, and when you put these all together, these look really, really cool. You can see this family starting to build, and it's looking really nice. I really like how these colours work well with each other. We have the black, we have the yellow, we have the purple, we have the blue, and of course, if you had the other green figure in there as well, this would look really, really cool and very colourful, and would make some fantastic displays. So I think these are looking really, really nice. Overall, these 3 figures, this is a pretty nice set, and surprisingly for me, I have to say the standout is actually the Venom, and I wasn't expecting that. I thought it would be Riot, to be honest, but the Venom is probably the reason to buy this set. I think if you're a huge Venom fan and you want a significant upgrade, he's definitely worth it. This is the best Venom I have in my Marvel Legends collection so far. The other 2 figures are a little bit disappointing in truth. They're a little bit underwhelming. They're bit more bare bones, but that said, I always love having an oversized figure in my collection, so Riot is definitely very welcome, even if he's a little bit more limited. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos soon.